intellectual, an academic, a writer, a campaigner, of the highest has himself of the intimidation, some of the wit.
So yes, I have been censored. I've been sacked from my job. I've been shouted down on Twitter. I'm labelled on Twitter as Iran State affiliated media because I produce a show in the press called Palestine Declassified, a weekly show telling the truth about Palestine and indeed about the Zionist movement. We broadcast it on press TV, and that makes me, according to them, an agent of the Iranian government. I'm no agent of the Iranian government. But I have to say, no figure working for press TV that there isn't any mainstream media outlet in this country or anywhere in Western Europe. I want to talk to you about NATO, and I want to talk to you about Russia. We want to talk about NATO. A documentary which I watched last night on Cambridge Analytica, the PR firm, part of the Strategic Communications Laboratories company group. And this documentary, in the Observer, and that the evidence for such a thesis in the documentary being strongly weak, impact on the Trump election. But that's not the significant point of the story, or indeed the documentary, because the significant point of the documentary, which is told to us from being an interviewee in the documentary, to actually giving the voiceover. And she tells us that the real implication of this is that Cambridge Analytica were working with the Russians. And the Russians put Donald Trump in the White House. Of course, the other implication, and part of the story alluded to in the documentary, is that the reason why people wanted to leave Cambridge Analytica was wanting to leave the EU, and that made people rebel. Of course, it doesn't matter that the evidence of the documentary shows that Cambridge Analytica didn't even do anything. It just advised them to kill the country instead. The interesting thing, I think, about this is that this notion that happens in our society. It's not just disaster. What's true is the huge investment of resources in this country, of course, being originated from Russiagate, fiasco which happened in the US, and in the US, a huge amount of effort into the idea that Vladimir Putin was very, very powerful indeed. I can't speak behind it. I mean, Andre Biden used to say that behind every headline, behind every bad thing in the world, there are Russians. This is nonsense. It's nonsense which is not just by accident become part of the informal conversation. It's come apart as a result of a huge investment in a propaganda campaign. Now, just to give you an actual story about Cambridge Analytica, the Cambridge Analytica I mentioned was part of this group, Strategic Communications Laboratories, started by an auditorium called Nigel Oakes, who was once expelled by police from Windsor Castle at a royal party for being drunk and disorderly. He used to run a high society disco, we would call them, in the West End of London called Raffles. And he went on to become a PR professional and start to do work in PR for a whole range of governments, and indeed for a whole range of militaries as well. What Cambridge Analytica and SCL were doing in this period when allegedly they were being used by Vladimir Putin to put Trump in the White House was actually doing strategic communications, public relations work for NATO. And where were they doing it? Yes, they were doing it in Moldova. Yes, they were doing it in Latvia. But where else were they doing it? Of course, they were doing it in Ukraine. So during this period that this company was supposed to be dedicated to undermining the Russians by doing strategic communications work in Ukraine. Now that's the reality of what happened. But you wouldn't know that if you read anything in the mainstream media in this country or in the US. Now, I wanted to go on to talk more about this. They were working for NATO when they did this. It they weren't the only company involved. They weren't the only people involved. There was people from the Ministry of Defence, from the Foreign Office, from the Cabinet Office, all of them spook related either in military intelligence or in MI6, who were placed inside the Ministry of Defence in Kiev, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Kiev, who drove the public relations and strategic communications and propaganda activities of the Ukrainian government before the US-backed coup in 2014, and all the way through to the current conflict. So we have a clear picture here that it's not just that NATO expanded towards Ukraine, but they were actually active directly inside Ukraine, pushing the administration in Ukraine towards the confrontation and conflict with Russia. We also know from leaked documents which came out recently that British military intelligence were involved in a plan to blow up the Kerch Bridge to the Crimea. The guy who was in charge of this plot, the guy whose name might be familiar to some people, is a guy called Chris Dorley, who runs a charity, is called the Institute for Statecraft in this country. And he's also a lieutenant colonel, sorry, an honorary colonel in the Strategic Group Military Intelligence, a shady and little-known intelligence group, which is part of the British military. He used to run also an initiative called the Integrity Initiative, which some of you might have come across in 2018, which was supposed to, in the phrase, counter Russian disinformation. And of course, it became controversial when it was realised that most of what they were doing was countering Jeremy Corbyn. And so several of us who were involved in the investigation of this organisation complained to the Scottish Charity Commission, the Scottish version of the Charity Commission in England. If it had been the English one, we wouldn't have got anywhere, but as a result of it being the Scottish one, effectively the organisation for the Institute for Statecraft was shut down as a result of this investigation. And Chris Dorley had to resign from the organisation and not be involved anymore. But yet here it is, 4 years later, Chris Dorley, in leaked documents, acting as if he's still in the Institute for Statecraft, planning to blow up the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. Something which then happened only 6 weeks after the planning documents, which were linked to some weeks ago. So we have a direct involvement of British military intelligence, of MI6, and other British intelligence agencies in trying to promote war in Ukraine. So don't let anyone tell you that this is something which is not being promoted and provoked by NATO. NATO, of course, has a hugely bad record of involvement. People have talked earlier today about its involvement in the Balkans and the bombing of Serbia. Of course, they were also involved, remember, in Libya in 2011 when they bombed Libya and they caused the death, the assassination of Libya's Colonel Gaddafi. And let's remember they also trafficked into Libya members of the former Libyan Islamic fighting group from this country, who were on the watch list for MI5, who turned up at Heathrow Airport and said, "Oh, we're off to Libya." And the special branch guy said, "No, you're not, mate." And they said, "No, it's okay, phone MI5. And so they phoned MI5 and they got cleared to go, and off they went to fight on behalf of MI6 to depose Gaddafi. They were then evacuated from Libya by a Royal Navy ship. And one of them, Salman Abedi, whose name you might know, came back here to do the Manchester bombing where he killed 22 civilians in the run for the 2017 election. That's the kind of activities which MI6, British intelligence services, get up to. They also, of course, did the same in Syria. People who'd fought for them in Libya, they trafficked them over to Syria to create an apparent revolution in Syria. The intelligence services in this country trafficked, it's known, 140 Britons across the border into Syria to fight with Nusra or with ISIS, because of course they opposed the Assad regime there. There's nothing that they will not do to pursue what they perceive as British interests, and that's of course why it's no problem to them to collaborate with the actual Nazis in the Ukraine. People could say this 2 years ago on the BBC, that the Azov battalion. People could say there's a history of Nazism in Ukraine. It's very difficult to say that. And actually, even even under the Soviet Union, the Nazis in Ukraine were still in operation until the late 1950s. It wasn't until 1959 that the Banderists were finally defeated in Ukraine. There is a genuine problem of Nazism in Ukraine, and it doesn't matter how much you airbrush it, it's something which has to be dealt with. And that is what is being dealt with in Ukraine today. These are not literal, these are not like Nazis, they're not neo-fascists, they're not neo-Nazis, they're actual Nazis. Let's be clear about that. There isn't any doubt about that. And what we find then is the question of how we deal with that, how we deal with the question of Nazism in Ukraine. It can't be dealt with by simply saying, oh well, we should just withdraw the Russian army to the Russian border, and maybe we can keep part of Donbass, and then everything will be fine. Everything will not be fine. There is a pressure here which cannot be dissipated unless the Nazis are defeated. And that's what needs to happen. Nazis should be defeated in Ukraine. Let's take up some of the points that George has been making about a multipolar world. This is something which has come about by sort of accident, if you're an EU position maker. Now, I had always thought, being a bit of a critic of the EU, that the people in charge of the EU, being ultra neoliberals, free marketeers, I'd always thought that they understood what the free market was, how it operated. But apparently they don't, because when this conflict started, they said, well, what we'll do against the Russians is we will bring in sanctions. And the Russians won't be able to do anything then, because once we sanction them, their economy will collapse. Now, they didn't seem to realise that actually you can sell things to other countries, that some countries are self-sufficient in some products, like, for example, oil or and of course what's happened as a result of these sanctions is that the countries which have suffered the most have been the European economies. This is a process which is resulting in industrial destruction of European economies. It's backfired on the European economies. And then you ask the question, when the Nord Stream is blown up by the Americans, well, why would the Europeans not